from 2014. This column is reliant on Facebook providing embed codes to users. Many of the comments made in each editorial reference those articles shared on Facebook, and by denying the code, Facebook prevent the easy distribution of those articles in another way will have to be found, meaning less time spent on Facebook. An expected fallback will be Twitter. Facebook are free to do anything they please. Those embed codes mean they have badged those articles I reference, and it is good for them. And my moving away from Facebook to Twitter will mean less traffic long term, but also less traffic when my column takes off. Currently, Sydney Conservative gets from 1,000 hits a day to 4,000 hits a day. Libertarianism is idealistic for adherents, but unlike other ideals, it isn't perfectly expressed. A libertarian wants reduced regulation, but not no regulation, which is anarchy. And anarchy is very different to libertarian. Markets don't need the distortion of overregulation, but they need sufficient to be markets which function as markets. So a person who calls themselves libertarian is being dishonest if they say it means they don't like rules. There are some they think that are sensible. The questions remain, which? Just as with conservatives, libertarians can have markedly different positions which fall under the umbrella, unlike socialists, which tend to converge upon the one opinion which fails to holistically retain expression sensibly. Ultimately, the conservative voice articles published under Sydney Conservative want to be independent of Google, Facebook, and their arbitrary rules. In Sydney, an ADF guy was attacked by people who roughly fit the bill of Islamic. Because of that, it is lucky it is reported at all. The Age has declined to report a couple of cars in Melbourne which stopped in a street and had occupants brawling. Had they not appeared to be Islamic, it might have been reported. People need to be aware of public disturbances so they know where they can be and make informed decisions. It is a basic part of freedom and democracy. Already there are those who are obfuscating the issue, and it will be the tension between Islam and terror. Terrorists claim to be Islamic. Islamic leaders embrace their values, but the activity of terrorists is not reflective of Islam according to Islamic peoples. There is a reason why young Islamic peoples are radicalised, and that reason is disputed by terrorist apologists. And for that, the reason lies outside Islam, because some of the worst killers in the Middle East are radicalised, raised in the West. The disturbing thought is that they are radicalised by the West towards Islam, and it is important for us to know why. But apologists are obfuscating over the issue. The obvious reality is that truth is not part of radical ideology. And in the West, the left-wing deconstructionists have disregarded truth in favour of opinion. Children like direction and react badly when denied it. This is not to excuse the activity of terrorists as being upset children, but trying to understand their behaviour so as to address it. And media are not doing their job, and because of that, it exists. Putting aside terrorism for a moment, the mainstream media have done a bad job of explaining things to reasonable people. On Al Jazeera, with a range of other exploring radicalization of Islamic youth, was Jason Morrison, who is a reasonable bloke and centre-right in political outlook, although he's often too balanced and takes on left-wing values at times. Like he did in that particular interview when he deplored the activity of a radicalized youth participating in terrorism overseas. So the terrorist apologist asked him if he felt the same way about youths going to Israel to serve in the IDF. The panel convener did not provide a framework for Morrison, and he made the common mistake of saying that there was equivalence between terrorism and serving in the IDF. Morrison is not stupid and would be aware of the mistake, but in interview destabilized by different apologists for terror, Morrison agreed to something stupid. There is no equivalence between an IDF officer and a terrorist. An IDF officer is well trained as any Australian soldier and would not be party to what terrorists do. We are too conditioned to be reasonable when faced with terrorist lies, because the truth is not discussed in mainstream media. It is not known that Palestinians are not a real people, but a UN construction, only coming into existence after 1967. It is not known that Lebanon fought a civil war which impinged on Israel. It is not known that Israel is a peaceful nation beset by those wanting her destroyed. And the chaff thrown up by mainstream media means, when faced with those truths, a reasonable person throws up their hands and says they don't know what to think. There are too many competing voices without the truth, the obvious reality to be seen. And this is what is radicalizing Islamic youth. Not Islam, although the leaders seem confused on that issue. It is the ABC and Fairfax and mainstream media pushing excuses and memes for hungry radical leaders. The narratives drift at mainstream media hubs so as to satisfy the broader accusation of blood libel of Jews dating back before the Protocol of the Elders of Zion. Only that work was made as an anti-Semitic lie. Has immigration brought terror to Australia? Should we blame Islam before Australia? Is terrorism protected by anti-racism? Is the wolf at the door or in the house? The Grand Mufti can't speak English or the language of his followers. The boy has shot by police heavily identifies with ISIS. Was he a terrorist? Certainly the age identified was not a terrorist, but the child of a hero who, now he's been identified, is at risk of terrorists everywhere. Age understand appeasement as a course of action, and the left fail to understand why kids are radicalized by left-wing rhetoric. A Frenchman is beheaded by terrorists, and Darwin Muslims pray against terror. And finally, we find Islamic leaders who preach the religion of peace. And bigots who hate Islam try to goad everyone into opposing Islam to oppose terrorism. Generational welfare relates to migration. University training too liberal. Nuclear power and dams are best for limiting plant food. Kate Blanchett gets an honorary science doctorate by spouting hysteric AGW lies. Meanwhile, a union kicks out a whistleblower who reports on their corruption, and an HSU boss testifies that he lied for the ALP Vice President Williamson about bogus payments credited to Williamson from union members.